This is RealAgriculture.com Seedpod, the podcast that gives you insight into the Canadian seed industry. And we're back for another episode of the Seedpod on RealAgriculture.com. This is your host, Sean Haney, and today I've got a really special guest. We are joined by Bud Hughes of Verdant Partners. How are you doing today, Bud?
I'm great, Sean. Thank you.
Yeah, but it's great to have you on the Seedpod. We're going to talk about a very, very interesting topic today that is very prevalent in the seed industry from a news perspective. But first, I want to thank our sponsors, BioVision Seed Labs, to the gang there, Holly and Trevor, and everybody at BioVision for sponsoring the Seedpod. This is the second year they've done it, and I want to thank them for it. Seed and grain quality. You need the best analysis team working for your fast-paced seed company, research organization, and agribusiness or farm. Our lab is committed to innovation, high-quality analytical results that are on time when you need them. Building on a solid foundation of germination, purity, and disease testing, BioVision is also now the expert in DNA varietal identification, grain quality analysis, and club root diagnostics. Let's grow together. Find us at biovision.ca. So, but provide us, before we get started here, provide us with a little bit of your background. What do you and Verdant Partners do in the seed industry?
Yeah, glad to touch on. My personal background is I've been in the crop agriculture business most of, and in fact, most of that has been spent in and around the seed and the crop genetics industry, as we call it. And I'm a production guy. I grew up producing seed, grew up producing crops, agronomy, operational type stuff. I actually have spent most of my 30 years in the seed business in the southern United States, across the Sun Belt, working in various crops like cotton, where I spent 15 years as the CEO of a company called Stoneville, which is now part of Bayer's global cottonseed business. So my background has been in seed for many, many years. I've been involved with lots of different mergers and acquisitions, which is what Verdant Partners does today. We do M&A work, advising clients on mergers and acquisitions, and also doing strategic consulting, helping people figure out, how to compete in today's world, but also survive in tomorrow's world. And it's all in and around that very special industry we call crop genetics. So it's very tightly focused on sort of crop inputs and near post-harvest gate crop outputs. That's what Verdant does. And what makes us unique is we're not New York bankers. We're seed guys. We're guys that come right out of the industry and know the industry backwards and forwards. So when we have conversations about things like genetics, we can talk the language.
Well, since we're going to talk about M&A and merger and acquisition activity in the seed industry, I'm clearly talking to the right guy. So right now we're seeing a lot of talk about consolidation. We actually just had a big deal announced a couple weeks ago before Christmas there, Dow, DuPont. There's a lot of talk about, of course, Syngenta and Monsanto, and there's a lot of other companies too. What motivates companies to participate in M&A at times like these?
Well, you have to start by realizing that M&A is constant, and because change is constant. I mean, every one of us knows that. We used to tell a joke about the old guy sitting on the porch, and the young fella asked him, "I bet you've seen a lot of change," and he says, "Yeah, and I was against every one of them," which is just kind of funny. We can all kind of relate to that in one way or another. But the fact is, change always happens, and there's something changes every week, every month, every year, and it's no different in agriculture or any other part of our lives. And so I think, on that background, as we look at businesses are continuing to shuffle the deck and looking at how to diversify their risk versus their opportunity, and that generally means adding to the portfolio, opening up new markets, looking at where they can bring products to market. And so there's always some kinds of change going on all the time. Now, there are times, such as we're seeing now, where we start to see very, very large-scale change. It's one thing for Dow to say, we want to sell a piece of our business. It's another thing for Dow to sell, say, basically, we're going to merge our entire business with DuPont. So when we see these big, giant multinationals begin to change wholesale by doing mergers like this, it's still about getting the mix right. It's still about figuring out how to be the best, most productive company they can. So they're looking at things like efficiencies and scalability and diversification and just the ability to sustain the business going forward. One thing we know about crop agriculture is it's very research intensive. What most of us see in the market as growers, as seed companies and stuff, is that the stuff that gets marketed to us at the market level, we see a finished product. What we don't always see is the research engine behind it, or the production programs behind it that are trying to develop best-in-class quality, best-in-class cost of goods. Because at the end of the day, we have to invest in quality products, we have to invest in new technologies, and we have to invest in new genetics, which is a very long-term objective. And you can't sort of jump into that and jump out of it every year. That investment has to be constant. Well, that investment has to be funded and paid back at some point. So it's okay not to pay it all back this year or next year, but you have to pay it back at some point. And as these companies begin to look at the long term, they realize it's more and more difficult today to be competitive and to continue to bring those best products and still make good money in return for their shareholders.
Well, you mentioned that they do have to pay for themselves, and just because too small, or maybe one large company acquires a smaller entity, or maybe it's two large companies like Dow and DuPont getting together, this doesn't always mean that it goes well. Like, when I think of mergers and acquisitions, one of the worst M&As I ever, I think in our lifetime was the AOL and Time Warner. Two giant media companies of two different genres coming together, and it was a horrific failure. It does seem, though, that these things sort of, especially from the big ones that we're talking about, they seem to happen in a flurry of activity. Like they happen in bunches. Why is that?
Well, there's different reasons. It's a good question. There's different reasons why those things happen. Some of it's just pure egos and follow the leader mentality. I mean, you remember, most of your listeners remember, it hasn't been very many years ago when all these big multinationals decided they weren't going to be chemical companies. They were going to be life sciences companies. And every one of them said, we're going to do ag and pharmaceuticals. They did that, and a few years later, one of them did it, and they all did it. And then a few years later, they said, that was a really stupid idea. Pharmaceuticals and agriculture are two different things. And they pulled them all back apart. So kind of herd mentality there. Sometimes I think the lemmings are just all going off the cliff. but it's also about just trying to find the timing of things. And the one example right now is everyone is subject to the changes in the commodity markets. I mean, obviously commodities aren't worth today what they were a few years ago. On a per bushel or a per pound or a per ton basis. And so that all affects everyone. And I think those kind of things change the profit and loss statement sheet of all these companies, and change profitability and the return on that investment, and make them start to reconsider all these changes. So sometimes it's concrete drivers like commodity prices, and sometimes it's just more this herd mentality.
Yeah, like when obviously corn is king, as we all talk about, and as corn prices go lower, companies try to find expansion of portfolio, but at the same time, this old word of synergizing the business in terms of being more cost effective and things like that, which is a goal, and as we talked about earlier, not always achieved, but sometimes it is. And we go through these cycles of consolidation, right? So we went through a period where it was Zeneca, Novartis, and the whole. Like all the legacy companies that made Bear Crop Science that we know today, and some of the history of Lima Grain. There's lots of these cycles. Is this cycle that we're in right now, is this the same, or is it different than the past in your opinion?
Good question. I think in a large sense, Sean, it's the same. And we all know, if we deal in agriculture, we all know that the tide ebbs and flows. That we have up markets and then we have down markets, and some years are really good and some years are really not so good. And that goes with the crop production itself, but that also goes with the actual commodity markets that we all depend on. And I think so I could sit there and sit here and say to you that seeing these rolls in the tide are very much things we've seen in the past. I think what makes it different today is a couple of things. One is the level of investment in agriculture today. That it's one thing if you're a small company and you're investing $1 or $2 or $10 million into the company. It's another thing if you're one of these global companies and you're spending $2 million a day. The level of investment is huge, and so if you go up fast, but if you go down really fast. And I think as we go through those tides, those ebbs and flows, most of us who've been in agriculture know when times get tough, you put your head down and you watch your costs and you take care of your business and you do the fundamental things you need to do to survive through the down market, because it will come up again at a point. What's different today is a lot of these large corporations, not only do they have huge sums of money invested and large portfolios to watch after, but they also have these corporate boards, many of whom are not agriculture backgrounds. So in fact, you have these, some of these boards that have active people on the boards that frankly are not real in favor of agriculture. And because of those boards, because of the shareholder base that is publicly traded on the stock market, you get this mentality of, I'm not willing to wait 5 years for this to come back. What have you done for me lately? And I think that what have you done for me lately mentality, coupled with the investment they have, puts a little more pressure on these companies to make these changes. And I think it's interesting because I would argue that today the small companies, they still get it. They're the ones that have pushed their hat down on their head, and they're going to make it through this storm. And actually, maybe it's not the best market they've ever been in, but they're doing fine. These bigger companies are making big, giant decisions, and they're the ones that are in more of a panic over this because they're just not willing to wait through the storm.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It seems if you look at the different tiers in the seed industry globally, clearly we have some very, very large companies. And it seems that, they've been over the last 2 decades working their way towards being similar to the auto sector, where we've got, 3 or 4 main providers or manufacturers of product. Do you think from the mid and smaller seed companies' perspective that's actually a massive opportunity? And sometimes we look at it as almost like a negative, as a consolidation, but really it provides a lot of opportunity in the market for other players as well.
It certainly can. And I was talking to a seedsman friend of mine from Eastern Canada recently, and he told me that his business grew 10% this past year, and he expects it to grow another 10% next year. And I said, whose business are you taking? And he said, it's coming out of the big guys, because they're distracted by this. They're going through these big mergers. People down at the field level are concerned about having a job next year, much less selling this month's product ratio. So I think so the small companies can sometimes find these opportunities in the market to go in and say, we've always been here. We're going to continue to be here for you. You know me. I'm not changing salesman on you, next year and the year after. And they can bring this stable position to the market. But sometimes, as good as the big guys are, they have challenges with at times.
So one of the things in I look at this landscape that seems to me that's added a new maybe chess piece or a new piece of complexity is that traditionally the major players in this M&A area have been, North American companies or European companies. And now we're starting to hear with, some of the BRIC countries, we're starting to hear investment dollars coming out of there. And we've obviously got a Chinese company that's very active in the play for Syngenta. How does these new added players, these new countries, how does them being interested in some of these companies that we're very familiar with in North America and Europe, how does them being added to this marketplace change things?
Well, I think in a year, and I'll be that much wiser about that answer. I think it's, we've gone through some of this in the past, and we've sort of gone through where a certain German company, for example, became big in the market, or a certain company somewhere else became big in the market that we weren't especially familiar with, and we've learned how to deal with it. I mean, right now, the big wild card is one of the rumors out there, as we've all heard, is that ChemChina is talking about buying Syngenta, as one of the possible suitors. That's kind of a wild card for us right now because we've never had a multinational global seed company based in China, and the Chinese have a different set of rules than we tend to have here in North America, and so how might that affect things? I mean, we've sort of learned that European companies have their differences and their quirks versus North American companies. But if we go to Asia and we start looking at China, that might be radically different. So the truth is I don't know either. But I'm quite keen to watch what happens. And of course, there's a whole other conversation about what the regulators and politicians have to say about something like that as well.
Yeah, a seedsman friend of mine last week when we were talking about this topic, he had said to me that, it's going to be interesting to see if we do see some Chinese companies, make some purchases in this market. It'll be interesting to see as far as trade approvals, how that all goes. Obviously, China's been a bit of a hurdle in terms of getting some traits approved globally. So that could be an added thing to the mix as well. Hey, so when we do see these mergers and acquisitions, we always see kind of the press conference or the press release that goes out, and it's always filled with all of these, MBA business type buzzwords. Do you have a least favorite, Bud, in all your career?
Oh my, there's plenty of buzzwords. As a general rule of thumb, I'm the guy who hates acronyms. So. When somebody walks in spouting a bunch of acronyms, I'm usually the guy that's saying, well, what's that mean? Because even if I know the words. But M&A kind of has its own language, but I guess the word I hate is clawback, or I guess that's two words, but that's a term that's used to sort of say we're going to do a deal together, but if you ever get such and such, or if this doesn't work out, part of it's coming back to me. It's sort of like a renege, and not one of my favorite terms. And today, in this environment of cross-licensing technologies and germplasm and products here and there, every time I have to deal with something that comes up and it has clawback provisions in it, it kind of makes my skin crawl. But I guess it's just part of the business.
Yeah, I think mine is probably maybe at times synergy, because it's at some of these press releases you could probably play the synergy drinking game, where it's just like synergistic costs, synergistic portfolios. Like we tend to overuse these so much instead of actually focusing on what the deal is supposed to accomplish. But I really want to thank you today for joining me. This has been a great discussion. I would love to have you on RealAgriculture.com in the future, and have a great 2016.
Thanks, Sean. It's been a pleasure visiting with you, and there's plenty more to talk about, and will continue to be as this whole market evolves. But I'm always reminded that when we do stuff on the farm, it starts with the income to the farmer, and then it goes back from there to the inputs and so forth. So as we always say here in the South, it all flows downhill. We'll look forward to seeing how it flows and talking with you more in the future. Thanks, Sean.